Now let's start a little bit more complex project. I have started Vasco da Gama freshly, so we have an empty project and we are in Easy Assist mode. And the first part of our itinerary, the first stage, should take us by car from Berlin to Hamburg. And since it's a little bit difficult to set the route points to the correct positions of those two cities, I will use the GPS database from Vasco da Gama to set those waypoints. The GPS database contains thousands of cities around the world. It's a huge database of many thousand cities with their correct coordinates on the map. So instead of clicking on the map, because this would create directly the starting point of the route, I use this function here in the travel section. The route symbol here, the point symbol with a plus sign above. And this opens the search window for the GPS database. We will discover all the functions in a later lesson. By now, this is the search field and I type in Berlin. Click on the magnifying glass, and now directly below we are presented with a list of all the cities that are named Berlin or have Berlin as part of the name. So you can see there are quite a few in different countries, and the capitals or major cities are marked with this capital symbol here, and this is the city we are looking for, so I select it. Here we see the GPS coordinates of Berlin, and here is another function. We can create in one go, by the way, a text object at this stopover point, and we have 5 lines of text available. Only one is activated, and here Vasco da Gama fills in automatically the name of the city. So we can leave it here as it is. If we don't want to create a text object, then simply take away the check mark and it won't be created. In this example, we will leave it, and I simply click OK, and here is the starting point of our route. Of course, since it's the first point, it's the starting point. So you see, this is that easy. So we create the second point. I use the same function again. Now we search for Hamburg. And here it is, the second entry in the found list. As well, we will create a text object. And I simply accept with OK, and here it is. So by now we have the starting and the ending point of our first stage of our traveling route. So I will zoom in a little bit so that we can see more details. And by pressing the right mouse button, I change the viewing a little bit. I lower the camera down so we are looking a little bit more from the side right now. So I jump back to the starting point of the route to Berlin, and we would like to go by car, so we have to select the transportation for stage as seen in the lesson in before. We check it, select an object, go to the category cars, and this time we select the Roadster. So here it is. I make the route point symbols a little bit smaller so that we can see at least the car a little bit. And since we are using a car, we activate the acceleration and deceleration, so the car starts slowly and comes to halt slowly as well, very smooth. And now I will use a second function, the fading function. By default it is set to no fade, but I will set it now to fade in out 1 second. That means at the beginning of the animation our car will be invisible, then it will be smoothly faded in. The fade in takes 1 second, and then the car starts moving, and at the end, when the car comes to halt, when it stops, then it will be faded out during 1 second until it is invisible. So now I would like to have 2 buildings at each of the 2 points that represents the cities that are easily recognizable. And here we have the parameters for the object at waypoint. You see, we are still in Berlin. This is the active point. We start here. I activate the function object at waypoint. I press select object. This works exactly as with the transportation. And now from the main category Vasco da Gama, I choose the sites, and here we have many buildings for cities all around the world, as you can see. And for Berlin, of course, there is only one building that represents Berlin very well. This is the Brandenburger Tor. Now that we have selected our object, let's have a look at the use of georeference data. This is automatically activated with this object because Vasco da Gama has found GPS coordinates within the object. So it is able to place this object at its correct point, at its correct location on the world, on the map. And of course, we will make use of this function. This is very exciting. So since it is activated, I simply press OK. And here we have the building at the correct position in Berlin. Now let's go to the endpoint of the route to Hamburg. And here we do the same thing. We activate the object at waypoint. We select an object. We are already in the category size. And for Hamburg, we will select the clock tower. As well, GPS coordinates are activated. And here we have the clock tower at the correct position. So right now we have 2 emblematic buildings that represents either city, but they can be a little bit more bigger in size, and that's no problem. Below the work window on the right we have the global settings, and here we have a global setting for the object size. By default it is set to 100%, and now let's lift it up to, let's say, 140. Now you can see the buildings are bigger and the car as well, because this is a global setting and affects all objects. And of course, in those animations, the size of the buildings can and should be much bigger than in reality, because here we want to represent a city and not simulate a realistic situation. So there's no problem in making things bigger than normal, and the routing points, the symbols here, we can make even smaller to make them nearly disappear, so that we can see all our objects much better. So now the buildings can be seen clearly, but we realize now that the text objects are nearly completely hidden by the buildings or the car and so on, because the objects are stacked on top of each other and the text objects are lying flat on the ground, as you can spot here in the on the right corner of the car, and we have to change it. In the global settings we have 3 buttons that can change the behavior of the text objects, and we will use the 3rd button, which allows the text objects to adjust their position at all 3 axes. So the text objects now will always look to the camera. If the camera moves from one side to the other, the objects, the text objects, will turn always to look into the camera. This was the first action, but we still have the situation that here the text Berlin is still behind the building. And now we use this wheel to lift them up for the height, and here we can lift the text objects up in the air, maybe at this point, so that they are above the buildings, and maybe later on, depending on the viewing angle of the camera, maybe we have to change the height of the text objects again. So now let's go back to the camera settings. The camera control is set to automatic, which is okay. The camera profile, I will change it to side glance 70 degrees so that we look a little bit more from the side as in the former lesson. And now we will go to the preview and have a look at our animation. Here our car starts slowly and slows down at Hamburg. This wasn't that bad, but I would like to change the camera profile to another one. But before we change the camera profile again, I will switch from editor view to camera view, because we have learned in the former lesson that otherwise we can't see exactly how it will look like. And here we can spot now the view, and now I will change the camera profile to another one. We have two profiles named 180 degree side glance, and there are two different versions, one which turns counterclockwise and one which turns clockwise. I will use the first one, and now you can't see the car because now we are at Hamburg at the end of our route, and you remember here at the end the car will be faded out. So this is the reason why we can't see the car, because we are at the end and it is already faded out. So I will use now the zoom correction to zoom in a little bit, let's say to about 110%. Okay. So this is the difference between the editor view and the camera view. In the editor view, the objects will not fade out because otherwise you can't work with them. Only in the camera view, the fade in and fade out effects will be shown so that we can see the scene, how it will look like. And as I mentioned before, now that we have zoomed in a little bit into the scene, the text objects are a little bit too high above the buildings, above the cities. We can see it here, and Berlin as well. So this is easily to correct. We go back to the global settings and we will lower them down a little bit. Let's say here at 12.37%. So let's go to the preview and play back our animation. Our car starts in Berlin, and as you can see, the camera turns around the scenery on to the other side of the car, and so makes the scenery more dynamically, much more exciting. So I will stop this right here and leave the camera view. Now we are at the end of this section. We have created the first stage of our project, and I switch back to editor view. So now we have the right moment to make a small pause. I've given you many informations in this lesson, and in the next lesson we will create the next part of our itinerary.